One incredibly powerful tool for any music composer is the template, which is like a save state that can load up the moment that you open your DAW or be selected from a list of various other templates that you've created. Essentially what this means is you have a preset for your entire program that loads up everything you need right away, rather than spending the time building it from scratch every time you start a new project. While there are definitely moments or projects where building the sound as you go is beneficial for thinking outside the box or helpful in getting you into a certain mindset, having one or multiple templates is a fantastic way to make sure that you are maximizing the time spent on creation rather than searching. Most people have a handful of plugins and VSTs that they use in nearly every track that they produce, and rather than spending time hunting down those plugins and inserting them into every new track they create, a template just helps those be available so that the flow state of music creation is never interrupted by the technical side of building the project. Having everything you need ready to go as soon as your template finishes loading is really a game changer for productivity. Having your plugins loaded, your mixer state already set with effects and EQs and compression and reverbs, just makes it that much easier to pump out a large quantity of music that has been set to your standard before you even begin. As I said before, you can even have multiple templates ready to go for any situation. When I make a game soundtrack, typically I make the entire thing within a single FL Studio project so I can easily listen through and make sure the OST as a whole fits together nicely. To that end, I usually also create a template for each game I work on, especially if the soundtrack uses VSTs I don't normally use, like obscure synths or niche percussion instruments, for example, so I can easily have everything within reach the moment I think about it. I have a template for my orchestral music, one for my rock and metal music, one for my synthwave stuff, etc. If you're a producer who likes to bounce between genres, templates are your best friend. So how does one go about creating a template? First and foremost, no matter the genre of music you are creating, it's important to know what you typically reach for when the need arises. For rock music, maybe you always reach for a bass, a drum kit, a guitar or two, a keyboard, and have a vocal track to lay down. For orchestral stuff, you always have a string section, brass, woodwinds, percussion, pianos, harps, choir, etc. Those are all valid options for things that should be set up in a template. Even if you don't know exactly what VSTs you want to use for each purpose, even just having the space set aside for those pieces is incredibly helpful in guiding you or outlining what you are going to want to add later. You may not know what bass VST you want to use, but having a contact instance labeled bass and a mixer track reserved for bass lets you know that at some point in the track you are going to want to put something in there. And that's the thing about templates. They can be as rigid or as freeform as you want them to be. The most important thing about having a template is that it lets you create music faster and get to a high quality product quickly. A lot of producers may scoff at having a template because they believe it puts them into a box and limits their creative expression. However, as with anything in music creation, it's how you use the template that actually informs your process and creativity. So let's get into how I've built my template. My primary genre is orchestral music for games. As such, I have space reserved for each section of the orchestra in addition to some extraneous instruments I like to use. Specifically, I have first violins, second violins, violas, cellos, basses, French horns, trumpets, tenor trombones, bass trombones, tubas, piccolos, flutes, clarinets, oboes, bassoons, English horns, bass clarinets, contrabassoons, soprano, alto, tenor, and bass saxophones, piano, harp, organ, harpsichords, celesta, glockenspiel, xylophone, marimba, vibraphone, soprano, alto, tenor, and bass choir, steel and nylon string guitars, shakers, small metals, bass drums, snares, cymbals, timpani, a ton of niche percussion items, and 10 tracks specifically left blank but routed correctly for any synths or extras not covered by my main VSTs. Each instrument has its own mixer track dedicated to it that is not routed to the master channel. Instead, each one of those instruments is routed to a separate mixer track, or bus, which is routed to the master channel, and, if needed, has an EQ plugin to tame some of the overtones and avoid frequency buildup in the bass and mid-range. These buses are mostly separated by instrument group, apart from my strings, brass, and woodwinds, which all have their own individual instrument buses because I use multiple different libraries for these instruments and layer them together. And having these buses separated out by instrument rather than section helps me maintain a little bit more control. These instrument buses are routed to the master channel directly, like I mentioned earlier, but they are also routed to a final bus that is specifically used for convolution reverb in an attempt to melt all the separate libraries together, to give the illusion of these instruments being in the same space. These reverb buses are separated between percussion and orchestra, which is everything else that's not percussion. Again, just to give me a little bit more control over things, and then routed to the master channel. The master channel itself has an algorithmic reverb, which, when combined with convolution reverb, really ties everything together nicely. In addition to that, my master channel also has a spectrum analyzer, so I can see visually how the tracks are shaping up and where frequency buildup may be happening, a limiter, and a compressor, which I kind of toggle on and off whenever I feel like they might be needed or not. That's the gist of how my template is set up, minus some of the more involved and optional things I've added over time, like sidechaining, which helps me when I go into the mastering phase of my workflow. It's a lot, and it does take a minute for my template to open up when I sit down to write music. However, it saves me so much time compared to building this orchestra for every project I am tasked with. Everything is routed the way I need it to be. My EQs and reverbs are already dialed in, and all I have to do when it loads is start making sounds. I love this workflow so much, and ever since I started working with this template, my productivity and output has skyrocketed. And if you had a hard time understanding what I was talking about there, or why I do things the way I do, that's okay. From here on out, I'm going to walk you through how to build an orchestral template like this in FL Studio using free tools and plugins. Much of this is going to be FL Studio specific information and methodology, but the principles should remain the same no matter what DAW you are using. Remember, it's the mentality of why and how you are doing this that matters, not exactly what you are doing. Before we begin, for FL Studio, you will want to download a free plugin called BRSO Articulate. I'm not going to go into what this plugin does right away, but it will be essential for our purposes here. I placed the download link in the description of this video as well as in the comment section, so make sure you grab that. Additionally, we are going to be building an orchestral template using only the BBC Symphony Orchestra Discover library from Spitfire Audio. This is a really powerful library that gives you a taste of everything that is possible with virtual orchestration and has everything you need to really get started. Outside of that, we are also going to be downloading the convolution reverb Reverberate LE from LiquidSonics, which is only available as a 32-bit plugin nowadays, but FL Studio can handle that still, and Ambience, an algorithmic reverb from Magnus at Smartelectronix. There are a great many choices when it comes to free reverbs. I just like these two in particular. I'd also recommend downloading Span from Voxengo, which is the spectrum analyzer I mentioned earlier, as it's nice to get an idea of how your track is coming together on frequencies. And if you want to get crazy, also consider OTT by Xfer or Frontier by D16 Group, which are nice free options for compressors and limiters. I've included links to all of these plugins in the description and comments below. Remember, free tools are more powerful than they've ever been, and there's no reason you should feel less than or like a fraud for using free tools to make your art. There are so many freebies out there that are incredibly powerful and high quality, and BBC Symphony Orchestra is simply one of thousands that can enable you to make incredible music. Anyway, let's get started. The first thing we are going to do is open the empty template in FL, which will give us fewer things to undo while we build our template. Next, at the top, under Options, hit Manage Plugins. Make sure you add the folder you've installed all of your plugins into in the Plugin Search Paths box. And if you downloaded something you don't have before building this template with me, make sure you hit Find Installed Plugins at the top left corner and let it do its thing. Once the search is over and your plugins have been found by the program, let's continue. Next, we are going to start populating our channel rack. On the default view for FL, if you don't see your channel rack already, you can toggle it by pressing F6. Off to the left of your main window is your browser, and the third option from the left at the top of the browser is the Plugins option. Select that and it will open your plugin database. Under Installed, you have two options: Effects and Generators. BBC Symphony Orchestra will appear under Generators and VST3. Once you locate it, we're going to click and drag it over to the channel rack and place it on top of the default sampler. Now the BBCSO plugin is live in your project. As you can see, you've got a ton of options here for articulations and instrument choices. If you're having a hard time seeing the entire window, you can click the arrow in the top left, and at the bottom select Detach, which will let you drag the window beyond the boundaries of FL and resize it to your liking. We're going to start with first violins. Each string instrument in this plugin has the long, spiccato, pizzicato, and tremolo articulations. You can click each of those articulations and play some notes on the keyboard within the plugin itself to hear how they sound. Normally, in order to switch articulations mid-sequence or while playing live, you'd make use of key switches, which are keys either at the very bottom or the very top of the keyboard outside of the instrument's range. In this case, hitting C0 on the keyboard will switch our violins to the long articulation, C#0 to spiccato, so on and so forth. However, memorizing key switches for a bunch of different libraries is borderline crazy, and that's the first area in which BRSO Articulate will come in handy for our FL template. Back in the plugin database in the browser under Generators, note, not in Generators under Installed, just Generators under Plugin Database, you should find BRSO Articulate. Click and drag that into the channel rack directly below your first instance of BBCSO. A quick note here, how you set up your channel rack is entirely up to you, and it doesn't really matter as long as you know what is related to what. My method here just keeps things straight in my head. How you set things up should support your workflow and make it as quick, easy, and painless as possible to make adjustments on the fly while you're in the process of creating. Anyway, now you've got an instance of BBCSO as well as BRSO Articulate. In the BRSO plugin, you will see controls for dynamics, expression, vibrato, etc. We'll get to those later. For now, you should look to the left of the green knob here for 2 quarter notes tied together. Clicking that will reveal some key switch options. Another quick note. If you start clicking and dragging within the red key switch box here, you will notice that the lowest note within BRSO that can be used for a key switch is C-2. If you press F7 to bring up your piano roll and scroll all the way down, you will see the lowest note in FL Studio is C0. These are the same notes. I'm not sure why, but C0 in BRSO is actually referring to C2 in FL. Just keep this in mind. Anyway, back to why we're here. We're going to be setting up the key switches already present within BBCSO in BRSO. If you are having a hard time finding what note you need, you can pull up the piano roll in FL right next to your BBCSO instance and hit notes in the FL piano to see where they are appearing in the BBC keyboard. Now, through our experimentation, we know that C0 in the FL piano roll is the key switch for long notes in BBC. Remember, anything in FL is 2 octaves up from what BRSO is showing you. So C0 in FL is actually C-2 in BRSO. So we will set C-2 as the first key switch by selecting the top left color here and dragging the red box above key switch to C-2. Now we can right click on articulation and rename this articulation to long. Next, we will click the next color to the right of the one we just created. The next key switch is spiccato, so let's right click and rename this articulation, and then drag the note for the key switch to C#-2, 1 note up from our last key switch. We'll do the same thing for pizzicato. Click the next color, rename the articulation, and drag the note to 1 higher than C#-2, which is D-2. Finally, we'll do tremolo using the same steps, using D#-2 this time for the key switch. Now, there is an arrow next to the green gear on the top left. Click that and select Save Preset As. Give this preset a name like BBCSO String Articulations. This will save us time in the future. Still with me? This part is really tedious and can get confusing, but the benefits are incredible. Before I get to that, however, let's set up a few more things. In your channel rack, you should have 2 items, BBCSO and BRSO. For BBCSO, there should be a box with dashes immediately to the left of the plugin name. This is your target mixer track, or the track in your mixer where all the sounds from this plugin will go. Let's go ahead and set this to 1, meaning any sound from this plugin will go to mixer track 1. BRSO will have a MIDI symbol in place of the target mixer track box. In BRSO, you will see 2 options at the bottom right, port and channel. The default setting is port 0, channel 1. That is fine for where we are now. Back in BBCSO at the top left, you will see the plugin icon that is highlighted green. That is the current window we are viewing. Next to that is another icon. This one has the plugin icon along with the gear. Let's click that now. This is where the configuration and ties to BRSO happen. Here you will be viewing settings by default. The bottom left quadrant is for MIDI, and you will see a blank white box to the right of input port. This is how BRSO will know what VST to use for the articulations you've set up. For our first violins instance we've set up, we can use the default port from BRSO, port 0. Change the input port in the BBCSO settings to 0, then click Processing at the top. This window is how BRSO will know what mixer track you are trying to send the sounds to. For the configuration we're setting up now, you can simply click Auto Map Outputs, and it will populate the output channels automatically in ascending order. Now we are finished setting up the VSTs and allowing them to talk to each other. This next part is optional, but I find it very helpful. Back in your channel rack, let's hover over your instance of BBCSO and shift-click. This will bring up a text box. I like to rename the actual plugins to their acronym, in this case BBCSO, and what instrument or group I am using it for, First Violins. So for this, I rename it to BBCSO First Violins. To the left of the name, there is a white arrow that, when clicked, pulls up a ton of icons. I choose the violin here because that's what this plugin is for. Now, there is a color tab to the right of the name. Clicking that brings up the color wheel. For the plugins themselves, I like to choose a basic color like gray or brown. You'll see why I do this shortly. For any instance of BRSO, I use the color I've assigned to that particular instrument group. For strings, for example, my color is light sea green, apparently. So I will now change the color of this instance of BRSO to that color and rename it First Violins without giving it an icon. Now, why did I do this? Let's hit F7 to pull up our piano roll again. At the top towards the middle, you will see Piano Roll, BBCSO First Violins. This is the currently selected VST that will play when you click the keys in the FL piano roll. However, we will no longer be writing our notes in the actual VST's piano roll, we will be writing them in the BRSO piano roll for that instrument. If we click the arrow next to the name of what's selected in our piano roll, it will pull up a list of everything that is currently in our channel rack. Right now, that's just BBCSO First Violins and First Violins. You can see here that the icon we chose appears right next to BBCSO First Violins. Think of this like a header. The icon signifies that this is the section you're in, but what you actually want to select is the option under that header, First Violins. When we select that option and start playing around on the keys, you'll hear the same sounds as you would have just playing in the VST piano roll. We're just playing it in our instance of BRSO instead. The advantage that BRSO gives to FL users is in the elimination of manual key switches. With First Violins selected in the piano roll, at the top left corner you will see a color. Green is the default. Let's click in there. Now you see a collection of 16 colors, but you are also seeing the names of the articulations you created earlier, whereas without BRSO these colors are just cosmetic. Selecting green, or long, will play those notes as you place them or click the keyboard. Selecting the lighter green, or spiccato, will let you play those notes without hitting the key switch manually. BRSO does it for you. You can now quickly write parts that bounce between articulations just based on the color of the notes you place in the piano roll. It's pretty cool. BRSO's benefits don't stop there, but we'll get to those after we finish setting up our template. Before we move on, let's collapse our first instance of BBCSO and put it off to the side. I like to do this with every instrument VST I use just in case I need to pop it open and adjust or double check something within the plugin. If for some reason your VST window disappears, you can alt-click on the plugin in the channel rack to make it appear without toggling any other plugin window off. Now, let's add another instance of BBCSO to our channel rack. This one will be for our second violins, so click the second violins section in BBCSO to select it. Directly under that plugin on our channel rack, let's add another instance of BRSO Articulate. By the way, at the bottom of this channel rack is a plus button that you can click to quickly add plugins like BRSO, so give that a shot to speed things up. Speed and efficiency and freedom from headache is what template creation is all about. Now we've got another pair of our two main plugins, BBCSO and BRSO. For BBCSO number 2, let's change the target mixer track to track 2, then rename it to BBCSO Second Violins. Change the color to match our first instance of it, and give it another violin icon. In the actual plugin, let's click into the plugin settings, change the MIDI input port to port 1, and in processing, let's hit Auto Map Outputs. Done. In the new instance of BRSO, we're going to first input the preset we made for the first violins. In the menu at the top left, hover over Presets, and a new menu will pop up in which you should see the BBCSO Strings Articulations preset you made earlier. Click that, and it will import everything you already set up for the first instance of BBCSO. Super nifty, since we don't have to hunt down and adjust the key switches again. One very important thing that we should do is double check the port and channel in BRSO when we pull in a preset. I've had these options be overwritten by a preset that I saved at one point or another. Sometimes it doesn't overwrite them, sometimes it does, but it's just a good habit to get into to actually check the port and channel. In this case, we set our second violin's BBCSO instance to MIDI input port 1. So we now need to change this instance of BRSO to port 1, channel 1. Another thing to note is that pulling in a preset will rename the BRSO plugin instance to the preset name and overwrite any color it has. So let's change that name to Second Violins and give it our strings color. After that, you're already done with the second violins. Now let's do the same thing for violas, cellos, and basses. One instance of BBCSO and BRSO for each. Make sure each instance has the proper instrument selected. Rename the BBCSO instances accordingly, like BBCSO violas, etc., and give them their color and icons. Let's assign the target mixer tracks in the channel rack as follows: 3 for violas, 4 for cellos, and 5 for basses. Within the BBCSO plugins, let's set the input port to 2 for violas, 3 for cellos, and 4 for basses. Don't forget to also auto-map outputs in the processing menu for each plugin. Now, in BRSO for each instrument, let's pull in that preset we made. Notice that the basses in BBCSO don't actually have a tremolo articulation. That's okay. Once we get to that point, we can just delete the name for that articulation in the bass's BRSO instance and wipe out that key switch. In BRSO, make sure the port matches with what we set for each instrument. 2 for violas, 3 for cellos, and 4 for basses. Then we'll rename each instance and give it the proper color. Now, when we pull up the piano roll with F7 and check the drop-down instrument selection menu, we're able to see our whole string section laid out for us right there. Hopefully, now that we have more instruments in there, you're starting to see the benefits of having the icons for each BBCSO instrument. We'll never write in the piano roll under anything that says BBCSO or any other acronym that signifies what library the samples came from, or anything that has an icon. We'll only write in the instruments themselves using BRSO to help us switch articulations on the fly without manually inputting the key switches in the piano roll. From here, it's a rinse and repeat for each section of the orchestra. Next, let's do our brass section. We will have 5 instances of BBCSO and 5 instances of BRSO, each paired up with the other. We'll do horns, trumpets, tenor trombones, bass trombones, and tubas. For target mixer tracks, we'll do 6 for horns, 7 for trumpets, 8 for tenor trombones, 9 for bass trombones, and 10 for tubas. In the BBCSO settings, let's do MIDI input port 5 for horns, 6 for trumpets, 7 for tenor trombones, 8 for bass trombones, and 9 for tubas. Let's also do our auto map outputs here. Once done with that, let's rename each BBCSO instance with the same library plus instrument format we did for the strings: BBCSO horns, BBCSO trumpets, etc., and assign our icons and plugin color. Back in BRSO, let's start with setting up the horns. Every brass instrument in BBCSO Discover only has 2 articulations: long on C0 and staccatissimo on C#0. Remember, that's C-2 and C#-2 in BRSO. So, in our horns instance of BRSO, let's click over on the tied quarter notes, click the first articulation on the top left, rename it long, and set the key switch to C-2. On the next color, rename it staccatissimo and set it to key switch at C#-2. Once that's done, let's head up to the menu and save this preset as BBCSO Brass Articulations. Last thing before we move on, let's change the port of this BRSO instance to 5, which is what we set in our BBCSO horns instance. Now we can move on to the other brass instruments. Import your preset you just created to grab the articulations, then change the BRSO port to 6 for trumpets, 7 for tenor trombones, 8 for bass trombones, and 9 for tubas. After that, let's rename the BRSO instances to the instruments they are controlling and change the color in the channel rack to reflect this new instrument group. I always use yellow for brass. After that, brass is already done. Hopefully, through repetition of this process, you're not only getting quicker at doing it, but getting a better understanding of these tools and why we're doing this. Although actually using them to write music will definitely reinforce the why. Next, we'll do our woodwinds. Same deal here, 1 instance of BBCSO and BRSO for each of piccolo, flute, oboe, clarinet, and bassoon. We'll use target mixer tracks 11, 12, 13, 14, and 15 respectively. Let's rename these in our scheme while we're here: BBCSO Piccolo, etc. Give them our plugin color and an icon while you're at it. In the BBC settings for each, let's auto-map outputs, then change the MIDI input port to 10 for piccolo, 11 for flute, 12 for oboe, 13 for clarinet, and 14 for bassoon. That's BBC finished. In BRSO, we'll start with piccolo. If you notice, the woodwinds included with Discover also only have 2 articulations. long, and staccatissimo, which use the same key switches as the brass. This means we can simply repurpose the preset we made for the brass here. So let's import our brass preset, rename the instance to piccolo, and give it a color. I use dark blue for woodwinds. Now we will change the BRSO port for piccolo to match BBCSO, which is port number 10. Repeat this process for the rest of the woodwinds and double check that your ports, 11 for flute, 12 for oboe, 13 for clarinet, and 14 for bassoon, match BBCSO, then we are good to go here as well. We are almost done setting up our channel rack. Next, we'll set up harp and celesta. Drop an instance of BBCSO and an instance of BRSO in your channel rack. We'll rename the BBC instance, give it our plugin color, an icon, and set the target mixer track to 16. In the settings, let's auto map outputs and set the MIDI input port to 15. This is our first instance within BBCSO that will have multiple instruments sharing a track through key switches. This instance uses C0 for harp plucks and C#0 for celesta. So in BRSO, let's load up our brass articulations preset again, only this time we are actually going to change the names of their articulations by right-clicking the name when we have the right articulation selected. Let's change long to harp plucks and staccatissimo to celesta. Once that's done, let's switch the port for this instance of BRSO to 15, rename it in our channel rack to harp and celesta, and give it a color. I like to use light green for harp and piano adjacent instruments. Now, when we pull up harp and celesta in our piano roll, we can switch which instrument is being played by using the color system we were using for different articulations within the same instrument earlier. And this is how we'll be doing the rest of these instruments, after we take care of piano, that is. The piano in BBCSO does not have articulations. Most of the adjustment comes in switching up velocities in the piano roll, but we're going to set up an instance of BRSO for this anyway, and I will explain why later. For now, let's drop our pair of plugins into the channel rack, select piano in the BBCSO plugin, rename it, color it, give it an icon, set it to target mixer track 17, set it to MIDI input port 16, and auto map outputs. Since we have no articulations to mess with, we don't have to set anything within BRSO at this time, except for setting it to port 16, renaming it, and giving it a color. I like green for piano. Finished. We've got 2 more to go. Up next, let's drop another pair in the channel rack. Rename the BBCSO plugin to BBCSO Percussion, give it our color, an icon, set it to mixer track 18, MIDI input port 17, and auto map outputs. Make sure you've also set it to percussion within the plugin. In BRSO, we have 2 articulations that are actually separate instruments like harp and celesta. C0 for timpani hits, and C#0 for untuned percussion, like shakers, snares, etc. Like we did for harp and celesta, let's import our brass articulations preset and change the long name to timpani hits and the staccatissimo name to untuned percussion. After that, we'll change the port to 17, rename this instance to timpani and untuned percussion, or honestly, percussion works fine here too, and give it a color. I use beige for percussion. 1 left. Finally, we insert a new instance of BBCSO and BRSO to our channel rack. In BBCSO, let's select Tune Percussion, change the name, color, and icon. Set the mixer track to 19, the MIDI input port to 18, and auto map outputs. This instrument group actually uses 4 articulations, so we can actually use our BBCSO string articulations preset in BRSO to load these in immediately. Once we're done with that, we just have to change the articulation names to reflect the instrument being used. Long becomes tubular bells, spiccato becomes marimba, pizzicato becomes xylophone, and tremolo becomes glockenspiel. After this is done, let's change the BRSO port to 18, give this instance a name and a color, I use orange for mallets, and we are officially finished setting up our channel rack, plugin list, articulations, and piano roll. Thanks for hanging in there for the longest part of this process. Now that our channel rack is finished, hopefully now you're seeing the benefits of assigning a color to each instrument group. Even with only 19 channel rack instruments, it's getting pretty full, and if you didn't have things organized, it'd be pretty easy to get lost and frustrated trying to find a specific plugin. With the color coding and organization we've got here, it's super easy to find any instrument we could want at a glance. In my workhorse template, I'd be absolutely screwed if I didn't do this, as I have about 150 channel rack instruments. As I mentioned before, I also leave 10 open mixer tracks with the contact instance pulled up completely empty, just in case there's something I want to add in the moment that I don't already have a space reserved for. This means I also have 10 BRSO instances tied to that contact instance. None of what I'm covering in this lesson is using contact, so don't worry about how that's set up, since I will do another lesson later on how to use contact with BRSO. I just wanted to keep reinforcing the idea that it's not necessarily what you're using that matters, but having the space considered for adding in extra stuff as you see fit. In FL, any plugin you bring in will have the menu we've been using to change the MIDI input port and auto mapping of outputs, as that's an FL native process, not related to a particular VST, which means you can take what we've been doing with BBC and BRSO and do it with any plugin you want. Anyway, back to the lesson. Now we will move on to setting up the mixer. A large part of this is done already, since we set the target mixer track for each instance of BBCSO. However, I like to set up buses and route things a very specific way. Let's start by renaming tracks and giving some color to our mixer. If you shift-click any mixer channel, the same renaming color icon dialog will open that we were using for the channel rack. If you haven't guessed already, I like to make my channel rack match my mixer. So I will be using all of the colors and names I chose for each instance of BRSO as the color for its particular track, and the same icon for the mixer track that is used for BBCSO instances tied to each BRSO instance. This is entirely optional, but it helps me keep things straight because within FL you can adjust panning, volume, and effects from both the channel rack and mixer. Feel free to skip this naming and recoloring if you feel you don't need it, but onto the actual routing. If you click on any of the tracks in the mixer, you will see a green wire extending from the bottom of the selected channel and reappearing in the master channel all the way to the left. This signifies that any sound coming into that track is being routed directly to the master channel. I do not want this right now. I'm going to detach each of our 19 mixer tracks from the master channel by highlighting the track I want to detach, going over to the master channel, and clicking the green upwards arrow above the green knob. This separates that track from the master channel, and now no sound will come through if we play something on that track. The version of FL I am using here, which is FL24, only has 125 mixer tracks, which may seem like a lot, but my personal orchestral template is using every single one of them. Like I said at the beginning, your template should reflect your workflow and enable you to do whatever you want to do, and that's just how mine shook out. A part of why I'm using so many mixer tracks in my template is the fact that I use a lot of buses. Again, this is all optional and you're not doing it wrong if you don't do this. This just works for me. I'm still going to show you though. If we scroll all the way to the right to track 125, I'm going to rename it First Violin's Reverb and give it the same color as my First Violin's track. For track 124, I'm going to name it Second Violin's Reverb and choose the color. Basically, I'm going in descending order from 125 and naming 19 tracks as reverb versions of what I've already set up in tracks 1 through 19, just mirrored on the back end of the mixer. Once I get to the last instrument we set up, tuned percussion, on track 107, we're going to then attach the initial tracks 1 through 19 to their counterparts in 107 through 125 by selecting the track at the start and clicking the small gray upward arrow in the target track. So track 1 connects to 125, 2 to 124, so on and so forth. Once that is done, on tracks 105 and 106, we're going to create a dedicated reverb bus for percussion and orchestra, which is everything else that's not percussion, individually. So on track 105, let's name it Percussion Reverb and give it a color. I like a light purple. And for track 106, let's name it Orchestral Reverb and give it the same color. Now we're going to dock tracks 105 through 125 to the right side of the mixer so that they are always present, no matter where we scroll within it. Simply right-click on each of the tracks from 105 to 125, or highlight them all by holding Control and click Drag. Head down to Dock To and select Right from the menu that appears. This will lock those tracks to the right side of the screen and let you adjust volume and effects in multiple different positions. Next, we are going to route these new mixer tracks we've created. Let's select track 107, Tune Percussion, and click the gray upward arrow on the percussion reverb track we made on track 105. This will send everything from track 107 to both the master channel and the percussion reverb bus, which in turn is sending its signal straight to the master channel as well. For track 108, percussion, timpani, and untuned percussion, whatever you named it, we will do the same thing. Connect it to both the master channel and the percussion reverb bus on track 105. For tracks 109 through 125, we are going to connect each of those individually to the orchestral reverb bus on track 106 and to the master channel. Once that is complete, your track routing is finished, and all that's left is to add our effects. On tracks 105 and 106, our reverb buses, we are going to add an instance of convolution reverb to each. So we'll click to select the track, and in our effects chain off to the right, we will click the arrow to the left of any slot to open the plugin menu. If you can't see the plugin we want, go ahead and click More Plugins at the top. We'll scroll through here and find Reverberate LE and double click it. To keep this as simple as possible, we'll just use a preset for each of these instances and tweak from there. For our percussion reverb track, we'll look here above the name Reverberate LE within the plugin and find these left and right arrows. Clicking through these is what switches our preset for this plugin. Let's use Hall Large 1 as our base for this. The only thing we're going to change now is the wet versus dry signal. Let's crank the wet signal to about 3.5 dB or so and drop the dry signal to about -25 dB. Remember, this is our reverb bus, so we're just looking for the reverb to come through primarily. For the orchestral reverb track, we're going to set things up the same way. Since everything is routed, when we play a note in the piano roll, we should be hearing some reverb come through. Don't worry if it's way too much. We still have things we need to adjust, and we're going to make this a lot more subtle. Reverb is meant to glue all the different instruments together to seem like they're in the same space, especially when you're further along in your musical production journey and are using libraries from different manufacturers. Let's click on our master channel to select it. We're going to add an instance of Ambience from Magnus at Smartelectronix here. This is our main algorithmic reverb that, when paired with Reverberate LE, will really smooth everything out and tie all of our instruments together. Again, we're going to keep this as simple as possible, so we're just going to use a reverb preset here. In the top right, let's click Preset, then we're going to choose Amoeba Hall. We'll leave this as it is for now, but now when we play a note in our piano roll, you will definitely hear some pretty powerful reverb effects. If you've played around in BBCSO, you may have noticed that there is already a reverb knob built into that plugin, and are wondering why I'm not using that instead of making my own. That's a great question, and I will get to that shortly. This next part is definitely optional, but really helps emulate a real orchestra. We're going to adjust the pan and effect levels for each instrument group and track that we have in our mixer. First, we're going to adjust the panning. Typically, you may not want to do this with orchestral libraries, especially if you're only using instruments from one library for the whole template like we are here. Usually these libraries come out of the box already panned the way they should be and the way they were intended to be, and if we play a note on violins 1, for instance, we can see in the mixer track that it does indeed lean towards the left track, which is good and proper. However, I do this anyway because I like to widen out the sound even more, but feel free to forego this if you don't want to mess with it. First, let's take a look at our BBCSO plugin interface. This interface gives you a top-down view of the orchestra, and we'll make all of our adjustments based on the perspective of someone sitting in the first few center rows of the audience. Imagine there's a horizontal line at the bottom of this image that represents the edge of the stage. This line will be our baseline for how we're going to pan these instruments. If there's a vertical line extending upward from the middle of our imaginary line here, we'll consider that centered in our panning. Now, we're not going to have our imaginary horizontal line be 100% panning on the extreme left or right. That's way too much of a powerful pan for a real orchestra sound. At the most, we'll pan about 50% left or right, so we're still hearing the sound of a panned instrument in both channels. Let's set values for our panning, which we'll be doing in our mixer on tracks 1 through 19 using the knob that's directly under the mixer monitor. Taking a look at our chart from BBCSO, with extreme left and right being 50% panned in those directions, and center being, well, centered, we can use these values for each instrument. First violins, 40% because it's a big section. Second violins, 25% left. Violas, 25% right. Cellos, 40%, mirroring the first violins. Basses, 50%. Horns, 40% left. Trumpets, 34% right, tenor trombones 36% right, bass trombones 38% right, tubas 40% right, piccolos 25% left, flutes 15% left, oboes centered, clarinets 15% right, bassoons 25% right, harp and celesta 20% left, piano centered, percussion centered, and mallets 25% right. Again, this is completely optional, and our adjustments here are not making a massive difference in sound, but will be noticeable. As I said before, if you're using one library for your entire template, you may not need or want to do this at all, because many of them come pre-panned the way they were intended, but I like doing it anyway, especially in small adjustments like this. The important thing is that you like the sound and the output you get from what you put in, and that it makes your workflow easier. Now, for the reverb. This is another optional portion of creating a template, especially when only using one library. Reverb is meant to glue the orchestra together, like I said, particularly when using multiple libraries for different sections of the orchestra. Many libraries have built-in reverb, as BBCSO does here, but if we were only ever going to use this library in our template, you could definitely get away with just using the reverb built in. However, there most likely will come a time when you decide you want to buy or use a different library for brass, for example. The reverb baked into the new library may not mesh well with the reverb BBCSO uses and can make the music sound disjointed. That's why we set up our own reverb bus and are not using any of the built-in reverb from BBCSO. Using this setup means we can swap libraries to our heart's content, and as long as we cut whatever built-in reverb a library or VST has, everything will sound as if it's occupying the same space, even if they weren't recorded in the same environment. We're going to use the same chart from BBCSO to determine how much reverb we want each channel to have. We have our imaginary horizontal line here at the bottom below the piano as the imaginary edge of the stage, and are going to adjust our reverb levels based on the perspective of an audience member. That audience member will always be a certain distance away from the front of the stage. Our reverb levels will be based on the distance of each instrument from that audience member. So, we can imagine several other horizontal lines stretching towards the back of the orchestra that will serve as percentage benchmarks for the amount of reverb we will give those instruments. The further away the instruments are from our audience member, the more reverb that audience member will hear. Since the audience member is still fairly far from the closest instruments, we are not starting with a reverb level of 0%, nor will we ever have a track at 100% reverb. I like to start with 50% and adjust from there. So our bottom imaginary line will be 50% reverb. In our mixer, if we click on the first violin's reverb bus we set up, we can see that right above the connection to the orchestra reverb channel on 106, there is a green knob. This allows us to control the amount of influence the orchestra reverb track has over what is being sent to the master channel. This is the knob we will use to adjust our reverb. Just like with panning, you can see the value this knob has in the top left corner of FL, right above the browser and below the toolbar. Let's set this knob for first violins to 50%. Now we will do the rest of our docked tracks. If the first violins are at 50%, let's do second violins at 55%, violas at 55%, cellos at 50%, basses at 50%, horns 50%, trumpets 65%, tenor trombones 60%, bass trombones 55%, tubas 50%, piccolos 60%, flutes 60%, oboes 60%, clarinets 60%, bassoons 60%, harp and celesta 65%, piano 50%, percussion 70%, and mallets 65%. Now, when we play a note in the piano roll, we should hear a much more smoothed out and natural sound for each instrument. You can also disable any of the reverb plugins from the effect list on the reverb buses or master channel just to get an A/B of what things sound like with the adjustments you made. It's very subtle, but it's definitely noticeable and glues things together. Again, these values are just a starting point to get you thinking about these concepts. You may like more reverb than what I've got set up here, so add some more to each track. Or you may like less reverb, so take some away. The purpose of this is to make it easy for you to add different libraries in the future without having to do all of this over again. Remember, your template is meant to free you from stress and prevent the technical aspects of making music from stifling your creative output. From here, you can add whatever effects or EQs you feel are necessary. Sometimes I like to add a compressor to toggle on and off on the master track. On my larger workhorse template, I also have EQs on each of the dock tracks that have some sharp subtractive areas to tame some overtones on each instrument because I use a variety of libraries that don't always play nice together and build up in certain frequency ranges when layered. For a template like the one we just created, there shouldn't be much you need to do in that respect since we're just using BBCSO. In any case, as this is right now, it is a fantastic first template for a budding orchestral composer and is very similar to the first template I made when I started making music for games. Regardless of whether or not the tools are free or paid, beautiful music can be created as long as you know how to use the tools at your disposal. And honestly, even if you don't, you just have to play and create. As you can see, we only used about 40 tracks here in the mixer. That leaves over 80 tracks to add whatever else you want. In my template, I have 10 tracks reserved for any extras, and they're just blank instances of contact. Space reserved for niche things that, when loaded up, are already routed to the way they need to be. If you feel like you want to add that space for your own additions in the future, you can just load up some instances of sampler in your channel rack and do all of the routing. Assign them a mixer track, label them extra, create a reverb bus, and route it the way we did with everything else. And just have the space reserved for it so you can spend time just making music and dragging the new plugins in to replace the samplers rather than routing a mixer in the heat of the moment. It truly doesn't matter. The template is not meant to handcuff you to a specific workflow. It's meant to do things you were going to do anyway before you start creating. The last thing you want to have to do is route a new mixer before that idea for a new chord progression or melody slips away. You want to be able to pop in and get it out of your head and into a project that already sounds good and closer to a finished product the moment it hits the piano roll. Remember way back at the beginning when I mentioned that BRSO's benefits don't just apply to key switchless composing? Let's get into what I meant. We're going to make a quick little piece here using some strings. Let's lay down a quick little cello line using the C# minor scale. Just 8 bars should be good enough. Above that, we'll lay down a viola line to complement and add some harmony. Let's use thirds. Above that, let's have the second violins play in unison with the cello, just a couple octaves above. And finally, we'll have our first violins play a simple little melody line. Here's where BRSO really shines for FL. Let's let our little snippet play for a second. It sounds okay, just very static and not a lot of emotion or motion happening with the performance. Let's fix it. Mute everything but the cellos. Now, on our channel rack, let's find our BRSO instance of cellos and alt-click it. In the middle option, the knob menu, we'll see those options for expression, vibrato, dynamics, etc. We're going to right-click the slider for dynamics and select Edit Events in Piano Roll. Now, in your piano roll, you will see that the bottom portion where you once could edit the velocity of each note now has dynamics in the top left of the empty field. Using your mouse, you can now draw an event map for this particular parameter of the cellos. This is how you give life to your instruments in FL and reflect a real performance. This is how you get the emotional swells, the beautiful fades, the dynamics of a real performance. Practicing this will take your music to the next level more than any new VST or plugin ever could. Let's give a nice rise and fall sort of performance to our cellos by drawing it in like so. Back in the cello's BRSO settings, let's right-click Expression now and select Edit Events in Piano Roll. Dynamics affect the performance or how much the player digs in while playing, while Expression typically has the most control over volume. Let's almost mimic the map we made for the cello dynamics with the Expression. now we'll really hear how things change. You can even see in the BBCSO plugin itself how the event map we made using BRSO is directly affecting the BBCSO plugin. Now, let's do the same thing for the other strings we have here. We'll have the whole quartet flowing with the cellos in the way we have the rises and the falls. We can adjust things without pulling up each instance of BRSO now that we have the cello maps in there. Just make sure the cello is selected in the piano roll, and in the bottom field under Control, make sure it reads Expression, and then you are free to switch to a new instrument and adjust the map for that parameter for that instrument. You can do the same thing for dynamics. This is why we created an instance of BRSO for everything, even our piano, which doesn't have any articulations. We really want control over the dynamics of each instrument playing, because that's where music of all genres comes to life. Finally, let's hear the completed loop before and after we added the events. It's a massive difference, and the perfect example of how knowing your tools can make even freebies shine incredibly well. It's not the tools, it's the time you spent learning them that matters. The key switch solution BRSO provides is phenomenal on its own, but having these parameters centralized and ready to edit and take your music to the next level of realism is truly priceless, and the fact that BRSO is free is mind-blowing. But it truly embodies what makes a tool and a template important. A good tool and a good template should do nothing but support your workflow and free you from headache and stress. It should inspire you to not only create sounds and pieces, but finish them, because you have more energy to dedicate to creation than you would had you been forced to do all the technical stuff simultaneously. You should get excited when you open that template because you know what's going to come next: creation and productivity. While everything I went through here is mechanically exclusive to FL Studio, meaning the way I get to a certain point is just how it is in FL, the ideas and the concepts I applied here can be translated to any DAW. Having your VSTs loaded and assigned to mixer tracks, having your mixer labeled, routed correctly, and organized along with your channel rack or VSTs, having buses that make the signal pass through effects before going to the master, having multiple spots to adjust volume and effect levels, having pre-adjusted values for panning and reverb, knowing how to easily switch your articulations and how to adjust your dynamics, expression, vibrato, etc. All of that is not exclusive to FL. You can make great music regardless of the tools you use. Knowing the concepts, understanding why you would want to do something a certain way, and applying that knowledge from a place of experience is the only thing that matters. So even if you don't use FL, try setting up a template in your DAW of choice using the tools I mentioned here and see how it treats you. I can almost guarantee that when you're done, you won't want to do it any other way. And if you do end up making your own template and 2 weeks go by and you realize, man, this isn't very good, switch it up. There's nothing stopping you from making several different templates or several different versions of the same template. It's pretty normal, actually. I've created probably 18 different orchestral templates for my workhorse, and even the one that I've been talking about in this, I'm in the process of redoing because I've just learned a little bit more about myself, my workflow, and new tools and methodologies to do stuff. So don't be afraid to learn and change and adapt and create something new, not just with your template, but with music in general. Happy composing!